Done. Okay, so this part, again, sorry for those who started the lesson in time. We are discussing about web usability, usability evaluation, and we discuss a second method which is called user testing. This lecture is a sort of replication of a lecture that I give in the first semester to the Advanced User Interface course. Is a sort of simplification of that lecture. So if you have taken the Advanced User Interface course, you don't need to take this lecture today. But if you have not taken this course, this is about the method that you will have to use if you decide to make a usability evaluation on your own website. So this is the subject of that part of the exam, which is optional, which is about user testing about your own method. So now that is a recap of what usability is and what are the methods of usability. Usability is referred to as easiness of use, how easy the user can use the application, which is different from utility. Utility is how well an application fits with your goals, with the user goals. While usability is just the mechanics. So can I use whatever is the application for, can I use it easily or not? And it's under the category of functional and pragmatic attributes of the user experience, which are one main dimension for the quality of the user experience. The other main dimension is called hedonic or emotional, it has to do with all the aspects that hit your emotion, your psychological dimension, has to do with attractiveness, aesthetics, fun, feeling engaged, and so on. The other aspect that usability evaluation is a pervasive process, and you should think about usability since the very early stage of requirements analysis till the final product launched on the market. We also mentioned last time that the usability of website is related to multiple aspects. It's related to content, how the content is organized, or information architecture, the way navigation and interaction is made available to the user, the labels, the semiotics of the functionality, such as link, the graphic layout, which was the subject of yesterday lesson by Julia, the operations, the way user error managed, and also in general, the cognitive overload. So we also mentioned in the last week that we have two main categories of evaluation methods. One is inspection, also called expert review, and the other is user testing. In the previous lessons, we focus on inspection, and today we focus on user testing. And these two categories of method differ mainly in terms of who generate the usability data. In the case of inspection, there are the usability expert who inspect the application and derive from their own perception what are the usability scores for that application, and that is typically done using some heuristics. The most typical inspection method, but not the only one, is called heuristic evaluation, in which the user have a set of quality principles called heuristics, and they measure the compliance of the application with respect to these heuristics. And then, in contrast, user testing, the entities who generate the usability data are the end users. The activity is the end user activity is task oriented. User do something with the application, and they can do it in different contexts, in an ecological context, so in the real context of use, or in an artificial setting, in a very equipped and artificial usability lab, or in a informal setting at the desk of in your office or in the research lab. Okay, today we will focus on user testing. So that was just a recap of what we did in the previous lesson. Okay, and now we have to go next. Okay. Before continuing about user testing, I just want to say that there are pros and cons in these two methods. Inspection methods save the user, so there is a cost-benefit ratio that can be taken into account. You don't require special equipment. It's the expert who sits at his or her desk and inspect the application and write down the scores according to his own judgment. The inspector can spend as much time as they need to go in depth and to find and discover bugs and weaknesses of the application. It does not take much time. Typically, it takes from 1 hour to 1 day, and it's relatively reliable in the sense that if the heuristics, as you will see, sorry, when you will do this group activity, if you make it clear what are the heuristics, how to measure them, what to do, you can repeat and repeat again. There is the replicability across different inspectors that can be supported. Still, the main advantage is that it's a subjective judgment. So it's the judgment of a group of experts who maybe, because of the fact that they are experts, may have some biases, might be too severe, or they're not fully able to put themselves in the head of the users. So it's subjective and might not grasp their true reaction and feeling and perception of usability of the end user, by definition, because these are the experts. So user testing methods are trying to collect data from a different perspective, the perspective of the real end users. So the two methods are truly complementary. On the one hand, you see the rational judgment of the expert. On the other hand, through user testing, using the second method, you get the data from the real users. And that is the reason why I ask you to use these two methods, even though in the exam you will not use these two methods on the same application. But to avoid to do too much work on this project, you will do inspection on, and you will experiment inspection with a website which is not yours, and it is about Monte Rosa ski website, and you experience user testing on your own website. So this exercise on user testing on your own website is optional because you might run out of time to do it, because it requires, doing user testing requires that your application is completed, your prototype is completed, but I do recommend to design your user testing before you complete the application, so that even if you have few days to do it, you're able to do something, because it's really an important feeling that you get about your own work. Anyway, what does observing mean? Observing means collecting data during or after the use. It's collecting data about what? About user behaviors. What the user, how the user react to the user application. So your goal is to uncover the actual difficulties that users have when interacting with the application, to discover what is wrong in terms of what is wrong for the end users, and to get systematic feedbacks on how effective is your product, is your system, and how efficient, how well the user can, how fast, how easily the user can perform the task for which the application has been created. So there are some typical questions that you wonder when you do a usability test. Can user complete the expected task? So are they be able to do in some way what they are expected to do? If they're going to make a hotel reservation in a tourist website, can they start and go to the end and be able to complete their reservation? So completeness of the task is one dimension. Can they do it in acceptable time? The issue that, okay, maybe I can do it, but it takes so many clicks that is really almost impossible. Or better, it's possible, but it takes too long, or it's possible, it takes a reasonable amount of time. What difficulty do they encounter? In which point of the application they make mistake, they need to go back and forth in order to proceed, or they really feel frozen in some point of the application. And how do they feel like about these difficulties and the overall system? Which, of course, it's something which is related to the true functionalities as well as to a sort of emotional feeling. So it's, user functional attributes and hedonic attributes. There is always a border, some aspects that are borderline between the two of them. So how do they feel like about the system and this difficulty? Of course, it's a very subjective and emotional perspective. So what is the general approach to user testing? First of all, recruit the right people. So recruit a sample of the potential or actual target user of the application. By potential, I mean a user that have not used a similar application yet, but they might use it in the future. Actual users are users that may have already used that application or a similar application. Of course, in your case, you will only have potential user because probably because it's your own application and you probably have not published it to the wide public yet. So you have to, it's important to clearly define the profile of these users in order to have example, to have tester who fit with the most relevant profile. We will go back later to how to recruit users, but it's important that if you do something for children, of course, you do not take adolescents or young adults to test it. If you do something for the elderly, you have to take old people. If you take something for the general public, you have to define clearly the segment of your sample, the profile of your sample, so that you get comparable results that are not too much biased by the heterogeneity of the sample. Then, so recruit, find people, assign them some predefined task, define where you want to do it. If it is a control setup, such as a lab, more or less control setup, such as a lab, your office, your usability lab, or an ecological contest, and then gather information about user behavior, judgments, feelings during the execution of this task. This information, resulting from the execution of this task, and you gather information during or after the experience, or both. And you can have both quantitative data and qualitative data. So quantitative data are time on task, so how long it takes to perform the task, number of error, task success rate. We will define this parameter more precisely in a minute. Or something more qualitative, such as related to parameters that that are not number, that do not that are not generated as numbers, such as satisfaction, frustration, perceived efficiency, perceived ease of use in a specific situation. Then you elements that you can map on numbers at the end. So, and now I go step by step towards through the various aspects. 1 second that I see if there is any question so far. No question? Okay. Okay, this is example of where you can collect data. You have typically a number of users and you have one moderator. The moderator is the person who interact with the user during to present the test and to actually to run the experiment. You can also have a number of observer, people who look from outside. Okay, sorry, it's a problem. Going next. Okay, this is an example of a usability lab. We have a usability lab at Politecnico at the Department of Design. Basically, there is, as you can see, there is a situation where the user is using the application, and another area in which there are usability observers that through as a glass they can see without being seen, and that which is here on the you can see it very clearly in the bottom pictures. So that is something which can be very expensive and is not much in use anymore. Now people tend to use more agile methods and more in informal setting, like in this case, which you collect data through a video camera, there is a microphone, and there is an informal setting. And you can capture through screen recording tools what the user can do with the application. So in this specific case, in this specific example, the user is asked to think aloud, so to make comments about the use of this web application. So his comments are recorded using microphone. He has a list of tasks here on the paper on his left. So through the microphone, he make comments. He think aloud. He make comments, manifest feelings, manifest difficulties, and through screen recording tool, the application we're able to collect to log all interaction on all pages. So screen recording capture the mouse, the screen and the mouse. So by looking back to the video, you can understand when the user has clicked. That is a simple it's a simple way to capture where the different also the floating ways for the user to interact with the interface. In some cases, you can add a mechanism to detect for eye tracking. So devices for eye tracking, so you can measure the attention of the user on the different parts, or you can simply use a video camera in which you record the expression of the user, face expressions. You can record also voice as a complement to the microphone. And you can, with this more sophisticated video camera, you can do some form of eye tracking as well. Okay, so it's important to make clear to the user that the subject, the object of the evaluation is not the user, but the system, and so that they should not feel in any way evaluated. And they're really partners of your evaluation. And you will experiment that if you decide to test your application. Creating a good atmosphere with the user is really important. Not just with people from your family, because the typical way to recruit user by students when they do experiment is to take people from their family. Involve other kind of people and make them participant to your testing, and make clear that they are the main actor of the experience, not the moderator, not the facilitator, and so they are contributing to our research. It's important that the moderator is very neutral. The moderator will be you in your case. It must be he or she must be neutral. You should not manifest in any way if he or she agree or disagree on something. His role is to organize a session, full stop, not to interfere with the observed subject. So let's, apart from these general principles, let's see how you can recruit user and how you can design your experiment. So first of all, define the user profile. So I want, because any result on usability will be referred to that profile and could be different if you have different user profile. So first of all, define the user profile for your test and the goal they may have in mind when they would use your application. And these are examples. Define people depending on the gender, on the social status, on the age, and try to figure out why they should use the application, so that you can, by the way, better introduce the test, and also you can ask the user to perform tasks that are meaningful for that goal. So, for example, I take the example from the Monte Rosa ski website. The goal for the user to go on that website can be to know something about skiing, or the goal could be, I would like to book an accommodation in this area. They're very different goals. And if you recruit user and you tell them you have to look for an accommodation, then of course the task that you design should be related to this part, even though you can decide to also to add task on the general skiing information of the area. So try to figure out exactly what your profile and what is the main goal of your user. Then recruit the right user, which really fit with your profile. And if the profile is too broad, is everything male, female, any age, is really too broad, and you don't get very reliable results. Or results can be on usability can be affected by the different user profile. Part of the user profile is also the familiarity with the website, with similar website, or with the ICT technology in general. The ideal user is a person who actually need to use that application, who is actually going to use your application when it is ready. How many users? Usability methods have been around since the 80s, and people still discuss what is the right number. The typical range is between 6 and 12. In a sense, the more the better, but recruiting users is expensive, is time consumer. So it's better to focus and to have several quick and small tests and tasks instead of having a huge, large test. There is a general rule, which is the Nielsen's rules for usability test, which says that initially, with a small number of users, even with small numbers of users, you can have very good results. With 3 users, you can get almost 60% of problems detected. With 6 users, you go around 80%. With 9, you get almost 100%. And then with 12, you basically get all possible mistakes, which means possible mistakes or possible, identification of possible weakness of the application. Then between 12 and 15, you basically get a confirmation of the result of the first bunch of users, of the first 12 users. So this provocative statement, you only need to test with 5 users, which is here. That could be an indication. So the crucial usability problem can be unveiled with 5 users. That is the reason why if you take the usability, if you want to do the usability test of your website, I suggest to use 5 users. You can use more, but at least 5. And that is the clear the clear, I mean, the visualization of what I've said. So when you organize, are there questions so far? Let me just go here. Is everything okay? Okay, no question. Okay, let's go ahead. The three main phases in user testing: preparation, execution, analysis of results. That is typical, by the way, of any study. You plan, you do, and you analyze. Preparation means define your timing, define the materials that you need, how to set up the technology, how to recruit the user. Preparing the materials seems to be stupid, but it's important. So define, and it's part of your design, the materials, for example, the paper sheet that you give to the user, or the way the form that you want to fill if you make observation. Then during the execution, you have to introduce the user to the test, and the user activity are perform predefined tasks on the application, while the system automatically or the observer collect usability measures. Typically at the end of the session, you don't throw the user away, you do some debriefing and a short interview that can become part of your results, and then analyze the result and report the result. An important step in the design of your user test is to define qualitative and quantitative variables. So defining the variable that you want to measure is a fundamental step. But do I want to work on completeness of task, on performance, on time, on satisfaction, on perceived ease of use? That is the first step. What are your research variables? That is typical of any empirical test, with user, no matter if you're measuring usability or fun or other aspects, or emotional impact of whatever. You need to define your research variable. Then you have to define very clearly the task to assign to all users. You're not going to distinguish between different categories of user, given the user different tasks. All users, that's a typical mistake that students sometimes do. They give a task to a user, another task to another user. No, you have to define all task, the task, and all of them will be assigned to all users. Then define how to recruit users, to build the material, create the hardware and setting, and also make a short test of the test. So try with the member of your teams. Okay, you do the test, so and I do play the observer, and the other way around. So you test the test. Defining the task is not simple. They must be relevant to the application missions and relevant for the stakeholders. So task, I jump some slides. Task should be contextualized in a scenario of use. So should be explained, for example, like imaging you are planning your carnival week on the mountains, and want to reserve a family hotel in a given area of the Alps. So creating the conceptual context, the story context, is important for the user to understand the meaning of the task, to create a sort of sense making for the participants. You shouldn't be very neutral in defining the task. You should not give tips. You say, okay, you are going to perform this. Try to achieve this. With that, you should not say, okay, go to the room and then look for the area on accommodation, and then use the search engine to do so and so. Now, give a task in conceptual terms. abstracting from the actual way the user would do the task in the application. And then what is the task size? In general, the task size is good task size is 5-6 tasks per user profile. Because you have to consider that the average time for the user testing per participant is 45 minutes. It should not be take longer. Actually, in very complex situation, you do it for 1 hour, but 45 minutes is the maximum that you can assume. So if you so just to make an estimate of the effort that doing this optional part of the exam, you have to consider probably 2 or 3 hours to plan the study. Sometimes variable times depend on your social network to recruit users. And then if you take five users, you have to calculate that the user work with the application for 45 minutes, but you have an introductory phase and a conclusion phase. So you have approximately the investment of time for you as researcher is 1 hour per user. So you will probably have 5 more hours. And then you have to devote at least 1 day to analyze the data, depending on how many data you have. And then you have to dedicate time to reporting. So it's not a big work to do this optional part of the exam, but I do recommend you to plan it in advance very clearly to understand if you have time and resources for doing so. So invest on planning, define everything in advance, execute it, which, as I mentioned, does not take much time. At the end, it's no more than half a day, and then invest time in good reporting. Does not make any sense that you just you do it just to rise the score of your exam and you deliver low quality, badly designed and low quality reporting. Another important aspect. Okay, when you have defined the task, you have to order them. So to order, to decide what is the first task and what is the last one. In some cases, it's suggested to alternate the order of tasks, whether equivalent tasks, so tasks that are meaningful at the beginning as well at the end, randomize the order so you can better understand if the performance of the task is not affected by the fact that the user in the last task is typically more tired than in the first one. But that is a sort of sophisticated advanced feature that you might. So these are examples of bad task formulation. You have not to say people, click on this, find out this specific service offered by this specific aspect, pick it up, find it, reserve, and then pick up. So these are simply, these are too specific. They can be broader, especially the last one. Is there a gift you would like to give to someone? It's not a task, it's a general statement. So be aware that the way you formulate the task and the level of abstraction is important. So, and these are examples of bad and improved task formulation that you can read. Concerning the variables, you have to distinguish between something that can have a quantitative value and something which is a qualitative value. So example of quantitative variables are effectiveness, so the so-called task success rate, which is defined, okay, which is for some reason I don't, the slide's not here. Efficiency, the time on task, error, when the user make mistake in does not take a good path, a good navigation behavior in the application, and also how difficult the user perceive executing the task. These are things that can be immediately measured through numbers, so they're called quantitative. Qualitative indicators are more related to the behavior, to the behavioral aspect. So to behavioral signals. So when the user manifests physical or through his face, his movement, his word, signals of disorientation, of being stuck somewhere, of frustration, when he has long waiting period or period in which he goes back and forth, or when he has unexpected behavior such as, wow, that is not what I expected, that, okay, this behavior. So you basically, in quantitative indicator, what you typically do, you define some behavioral signals that, and you take note of how many times this user have these behavioral signals. But the identification of the behavioral signal is something qualitative and subjective. That in that sense, it's map of number, but originally it's a manifestation of behavior that is classified through qualitative tags. The equipment that you want to use, it's important that you decide how to collect data in terms of equipment. So, for example, if you want to make a test, as in the previous case, you can, okay, you take the user and you sit side by side the user, which is something, of course, impossible, for example, in these days. Or then you need some kind of equipment. But if you instead want to run the test remotely, in which the user, in which you present the test and the user at his or her own pace or use the application, and then you collect the data automatically through log files. That is another equipment, and it's another setup you need to define trivially by setting up, by collecting the log file or the video recording of the session through screen capture. So these are two examples of Camtasia and CamStudio are two softwares that are free for a trial period and allow you to do screen capture. It's important for efficiency, for the quality of your execution, that you test the test, as I mentioned before. So you try from the beginning to the end to make a rehearsal of your performance. And your performance is the user test. Then what happens with the user? The user does the task, and the moderator and the observer, they gain data, they collect data. It's important to introduce the purpose. For example, you're helping us by trying out this product. We are looking for places where the product might be difficult to use. Remember, it's product fault, not yours. So these are example of sentences that you can tell the users. It's also today it's absolutely fundamental that the user agree explicitly for being tested. So there are some forms that if your users are strangers for you, or you're not fully familiar with them, you must ask them to sign an informed consent to participate, and a consent in which you declare that the data collected from the user are stored and managed according to the international privacy and security rules, which are stated by law. So if you need an example of the informed consent and this data preservation statement, just ask me, and I will give you the typical form that we use. Of course, that is absolutely necessary with people who are stranger to you, but it's better in general to have this signed from any people. Of course, if your test is informal, that is not the point. But if the test is something that you then report for the purpose of the exam, that should be there. Make sure that you inform participants that they can leave at any time. They're not forced to let them feel till the end. And also make clear that if they're not able to complete the task, that is not an issue. It's also important to explain all the equipment that you use or the mechanism that you use to collect data. One a technique that can be helpful, as I mentioned before, if you can record user voices or you can observe people while they are performing the task, is thinking aloud. Thinking aloud is a method that was developed by a psychologist in late more than 100, more than 1.5 centuries ago. And it's basically capturing the hidden thoughts of people, asking people to manifest what they think about the current situation in a totally free way, to manifest their reactions through voice and also through gesture. And by listening to these manifestations of inner thoughts, you better understand what are their intentions, what are their reactions, what they really feel about your application. Of course, as I mentioned, thinking aloud means required to have either a mic for voice recording, and it's also useful to have a video recording to interpret not only the voice but also the face expression. And it's a way to capture behavioral signals of the user with respect to the application. It's also important when you do thinking aloud is to explain what thinking aloud is to the user. Not just, okay, you can just say, okay, say whatever you want. It should be a bit more precise. For example, all you do is to speak your thought as you work and say what comes to your mind as you perform the task. And if you forget to think aloud, we might stimulate you to do so, such as using question, what are you doing? What do you see on the screen? What do you think you should proceed? What are your adaptive difficulties? Which are your feeling? So the idea that these are the kind of thoughts of externalization of thought that the user is expected to do, and the observer stimulate if he's present. When he sees that the user is too shy or is struggling in a specific part of your application and is not manifesting anything, to stimulate the externalization. Then assigning task, you have to explain through written instruction, through a form that should be reported in your document. What are the instructions you give to the user? You have to ask the user to read them carefully, and if they have any doubt, to clarify the doubt with you before starting, and then start the execution. You can track time on task, either automatically or with a clock, record, take notes. In some cases, you, at the end of each task, there are too many, depending on the complexity of the task, the way you design your study. At the end of each task, you can ask for clarification, or you can ask for clarification at the end. And you can do it informally or formally. So you can have a specific question that user can ask at the end of each task or at the end of all tasks, sort of questionnaire. Or you can do it informally and as a mean, and then you take notes. There are some, the interaction with the user in this stage, if there is the live observer sitting side by side, it's important. So you have to make no comments about the user behavior. Here are more qualitative measure about task success, and that is the slide that I was looking for before. So typical, that is a very quantitative measure that typically engineers like a lot because it's number and formulas. So task success is is one of the possible indicator of how effective is the interaction and how easy is the application to use. There are various levels of success. You can say, okay, complete success. You complete the task and successfully. You are able to complete the task. Partial success. You didn't complete the task, but you reached a good point. So you were not able to find a given information, but you found some information which were useful to you. Failure, absolutely no way to complete the task. The task is really incomplete, or people really give up. So these are a typical number that quantify these aspects. So you measure for each user and for each task, you measure if it was a success, completed, task was completed. The user got to the point. Failure, the user gave up, absolutely was not able to reach the point, or partial. And then with this simple formula, putting together successful trials and putting together these different values and weighting them, you get this number, which is an indicator of course, the higher is this number, the more effective is the application for supporting the user in performing this task. This is not the only number that you have to define. You might really be interested also to quantify. So a table, you don't necessarily need to perform also only this percentage. You can report this table. You can organize, in this case, there are 4 tasks. You can also study average results, and you can report many other values about, for example, success and the time to success, to complete the task. Failure, for how long the user tried. Partial success, at which point, after how much time the user seems to stop and say, okay, I'm almost satisfied. So you, from observing the user in terms of which task, for how long, the level of success, you can really derive a number of data about your application that gives you useful insight about the usability and the quality of your own application. Questions so far? Okay. What would be the known leader? Okay, there are many questions. Sorry, now. Okay, let me just read them. Okay. Allora, would it be okay to differentiate the task on the basis of the user profile and have the same task for all users or the same profile, or should the test be equal even for different profile? Okay, that is a very, very important question. My recommendation is choose one profile and give the same task to all users and defining tasks that are meaningful for their profile. Don't take radically different profile. People can be different. I mean, women are different from men, the elderly different from the young person. Try to find a number of parameters that are common to your users. And those are the parameters that define the profile, because the results are much more effective. In principle, you should run different tests for different profiles. My recommendation is choose one profile, 5 users, tasks that are meaningful for that profile. Can we use different modalities of testing together, remotely and in person? The answer is yes, in principle. Indeed, since you have required to do the test with only 5 users. It's unclear to me why you should have 2 modalities. Okay, or putting in other words, if you have 5 users and 3 of them use a remote modality and 2 of them use an side-by-side modality in the lab, in your office, at your home, you have some biases because the results are not comparable because the users are biased by the different setting. So what is important is that all users have the same treatment. Do not introduce confounding variables that might affect the result. So something can be, when I am sitting and relaxed with you side by side, the feeling is different than using it alone. I mean, I put myself in the user perspective, using the system alone with the perception, having no perception of what is happening. So the answer is choose one method and apply the same method remote or on-site for all users. The results are different in the sense that the users are biased because they're not exactly in the same condition. Okay, that is another good question. Sorry. If you run the user testing on our application and we discover the problem, are we then expected to solve them in our application by redesigning it? Would finding problem through user testing negatively affect our score? Okay, for sure, if you discover problems if your user testing discover problems on your application, that will absolutely not affect your final score. This is an exercise of self-criticism, okay, of understanding the limitation of what you have done. Because when I evaluate your prototype, I really do some inspection work. I play the role of usability inspection, and I discover most of the defects or the weakness of your application. So the answer is no, this does not affect the score. Also, the user testing, you're not required to fix your application after the user test. I mean, if you have time, you can say, okay, we have time, we do the test, and then based on the user feedback, we improve something. In that case, that must be reported. What we expect from you is that you reflect on the data that you collect from user testing. You reflect on the feedback that you get from the end user. And we also expect, even though it's not mandatory, we will see in the slides about the report structure. We expect that you reflect and you maybe make proposal for the redesign. Okay, so no impact on your score. The fact that you discover mistake, no need to redesign and re-implement your application. Suggestions for improvements are useful parts of the discussion session of your report. About what Ellen Palombi asked, if we have no time for redesigning it, okay, I think that I have answered the question. So analyzing weakness of your application, analyzing the results of your user test, understanding what could be improved and how, that is the valuable part. We do not expect you to rebuild everything. In which language should thinking aloud be performed? Well, I mean, I expect that, I don't know if your website will be Italian or English. So this is a good point. If your website is Italian, I would recommend to take Italian people to use it because they are the main target. And thinking aloud should be done in Italian. If your website is in English, which may happen, we have some students from abroad, then recruit people who have who can speak and read English fluently. What would be a non-leading question? Don't remember where I mentioned that, so I need to recontextualize. I think that the non-leading question, let me go back here. Non-leading question. Okay, thank you. Non-leading question is a question that is not really, sorry. Okay, a non-leading question is a leading question said that a question that leads you somewhere, that has the purpose of convincing, implicitly driving you to some point. Non-leading question is a question that is more neutral. The weight 0.5 is to give the value to partially, no, the weight, well, the weight of 0.5 in this picture is a weight, okay, success trial are weight 1, partially success trial are weight 0.5. Failure, you can decide if they do not count, basically have weight 0 because they do not contribute. This is one possible matrix. Okay, so it's a weight. So is really exactly this. Give half the value to the partially successful one. Of course, if everything is success, you will have a high value for the success rate. So 0.5 means for partially success means I'm taking into account the fact that you tried and you got at least to some point, even though you were not fully successful. Okay, other questions? There are no other questions. I proceed. Okay. The issue of how much assistance you have to give to people. Okay. In general, you should not give any assistance because any website is expected to be used without any assistance. But if something wrong really happens, so you have to wait before giving any assistance. So and you should give assistance only if the situation is really problematic. So if the whole system crashes, the network does not work, the user is stuck somewhere. It's important that you take note, you record situation in which assistance was needed. A typical assistant instruction is, well, try to go back to the home page or try to follow that link. But again, only if there is really a dramatic situation, because if the user is not able to navigate freely and to use the system, it's a severe usability problem. So I hope you never get into a situation with the user would not continue to do anything without your assistance. Task success, it's a repetition what I said before. So score the success, 1 for complete, 0.5 for partial. Partial success is also does not mean that you do not have complete the task. So that is a sort of further detail of the previous slides. So complete success means I do everything, I complete the task, and I did not ask for any assistance. I did not need any assistance. Partial success is when I do not reach complete the task as it was expected, or I complete it with some help. And a failure when the user is really give up or get to the wrong point. Also, you can use different another metrics, which is for each task in this slide. For each task and for each user, instead of using SFP, you can say 1, achieve with no problem, 2, minor problem, 3, major problem, 4, failure, give up. It's up to you, it depends on which task you define and how you measure them. Also, you have to define what are your stopping your rules. When tasks are unsuccessful, you have to define if you keep the user, you want to keep the user trying, or you say, okay, try it 3 times and then you're out, or after a given amount, there is a cutoff time. So after a given amount of time, user say, okay, no problem, try it with the next task. Time is an important element. So having a way to track time on task is important. You can do it automatically when you do the video recording of the session, like what we're doing now. An example, I mean, in Teams, there is an automatic video recording, and time can be extracted from video recording. Anyway, it's an important parameter. Time on task, time when the user had problems. These are all variables, data that you might collect. There's an important warning here, which is initially when you do the user test, you are excited. You see so many numbers and data that you can collect, and you tend to collect everything. Then you have you come out from the test even with 5 users with a lot of data, video, audio, time, logs, annotations, and it's simply too much to process for you. So I recommend to define, and that is why I recommend to test the test, because if you test the test, you see how much data you get, and then you ask yourself, will I be able to process of this data? Because there is no reason for collecting a lot of raw data and not being able to analyze them, to aggregate them, and to draw some conclusion. So a lot of data does not mean a lot of information. So focus your test also, because you have a limited time and resources for doing the test. Focus your variables and the data that you collect to the ones that are more meaningful for you, that are more interesting. So the fact that here on the slides, I give you all the overview of all possible variables that you collect, all possible situations which you can find yourself. Doesn't mean that you have to follow and to do everything is written here. Make a selection of your variable and imagine how you could evaluate, analyze this data, how you could represent it. So it's really, really important. It's a mistake that I have done for many years. Collect too much data that were left there because we could not analyze them. So plan carefully which variable, how to measure them, and how to analyze and present them, and test the test. And all the following are other details about how to track time on task. Errors, in my opinion, errors is really, understanding user errors is really an important highlight about the quality of your application. And errors are defined as incorrect action that may lead to task failure. Let me just stop for a second and see if we have any question so far. Okay, no question. Okay, good. So errors are incorrect action that may lead to task failure. What is an error? It really depends on your application. So if your application is a form, a mistake is I write the data with the incorrect format, which raises the issue that when the data should have a specific format, you should find a way to avoid the error and force the user to use that format only. Make their own choice in a menu, make their own choice of a link among different links, following the wrong path, so taking the incorrect sequence of action. And why to measure error? Okay, if user make errors, they lose time, they waste time. They might do wrong transaction, wrong functions, and in general, they don't get what they would expect to get from the application. And these are examples of so when you have a task, so if you decide to measure error, which is something that I do recommend because it's really it's really shed a light on the quality of your application. Try to define what are the main errors that you expect in general, and the error that could be specific of a specific task. So, for example, this is an example from in a more general context using Word. Insert the picture into a Word document. Okay, that is a task. You can say, okay, the error could be click the wrong button, or insert the wrong picture, or place the picture in the wrong place. You have to define the general error that you want to report. Usually, it's also helpful to have a table in which you list all the possible errors, so that when you observe the errors or you analyze the errors, you have just already the classification of the error, and you can make clusters and aggregated data more effectively. So defining error opportunity between the user test may is really can is really do facilitate data collection and reporting. So far we focused on variables and data collected during the task execution. Indeed, it is very helpful, and in some time it's the only method adopted. It's very helpful to collect data after the user, and again, sometimes it's easier to ask the user do things and then ask his impression at the end. It's more effective because you don't need to observe the user, you don't need to do anything during the test, but the data that you get in this way, asking the user something about his experience, his or her experience with the application, is less objective, is more perceived usability, perceived ease of use, which is of course important because the perception of quality, the perception, everything is what guides our society. Everything is based on our own perception. Does not mean that is the real thing, because it's clearly an individual opinion. It's a subjective feeling. So I would recommend to collect data during the user testing at the end. But if you have to choose, it's better to collect during the test, in my opinion. It gives you something more objective. Anyway, you want to also to collect something after the test to measure perceived usability. You can get qualitative things and quantitative data. So how can you collect qualitative data that are not directly generated as numbers? The typical method is an interview. So you ask a question based on a structured question that you predefine, but you ask questions directly to the user in an open-ended format to asking the user what they think about the application, what are their reflections about the usability, and as well on a specific aspect of design. There are many ways to conduct an interview. What is important that the interview the question that you ask the user and the method that you adopt should be the same for all users. Otherwise, your results are biased and you don't get comparable results. So it's important that you prepare the questions in advance. A more quantitative approach is a questionnaire. Okay, what is the difference between a questionnaire and an interview? The interview is direct, typically is face-to-face or by phone or by call, but you have a direct relationship with the user while posing questions. Questions are less structured, but the more questions are clear, the better result that you get. And they are open-ended, and you have to elaborate the results in order to distill the contribution to your research. Questionnaire typically They can have open or closed question, but typically when you do a questionnaire, you use closed questions, question that people can answer by, crossing something or giving a number. The post-task closed question are straightforward to answer because they have just done the task. You can okay, if you have a question like this one, you can ask task by task. As I mentioned before, you can collect data at the end of each task. So when people is not using the system but has finished to do one task and is waiting for the other one. Or you can collect everything at the end. If you collect the data task by task, that can become a bit tiring for the user. But yes, the advantage that user have fresh memory of the task. If you collect data at the end, it's better that it's more difficult to focus task by task because people may not remember what happened during one task, specific task. So there are pros and cons in both situations. And these are examples of different metrics that you can use. For example, overall the task was very easy, very difficult. That is a measure of the difficulty, of course, of the task. But you're asking the user to give a specific score on the difficulty of the task. What the user has to do is clear. This is a more indirect way to ask the same question. Because all these methods have been proved equivalent also from us in mathematical viewpoint. I was satisfied with the ease of completing this task. I strongly disagree or I disagree. So people is not asked to give a number, a score, is asked about agreement about a given statement. So in these two cases. So my impression, okay, when will you use this kind of methods? When you think that people has a kind of an engineering mentality. So they say, okay, for me, ease of use is clear. I have a clear idea if it was easy or not. Agree versus strong. This based on agreement, statement agreement is. It can be more confusing because people say they was satisfied, strongly agree, he thinks it's something positive, strongly disagree and strongly agree. They don't distinguish between what is positive. It can be more confusing. What is positive, what is not positive can be more confusing. The another issue is how many, it's about the range, how many value you put in your interval. Here there is 2, 4, 6, 7. Again, there are theories about what is the good interval, what is the good range, if it is more or less polarized. So in this case, because if you have too many items, too many numbers, if the interval is too long, it's well known that people don't take position, don't want to be nasty, that they want to please you in some cases. So they tend, even though they think that this was not very easy, they tend to put the scores in the middle. Or they tend to not say I strongly disagree, I strongly agree, say I disagree, I have mixed feelings. So they click in the middle. So if you want to have to offer the user a finer grained scale, of course you put more numbers, but you have to be the user. You must convince the user that he can be also very negative. He does not be too balanced. He can really must feel free to express his opinion, and he should try to differentiate between different situations. Because it's not clear why crossing the third one or crossing the fourth one, the difference is slight. Alternatively, you can use more polarized scales in which you say, for example, with 3 values, very positive, very negative, and so and so, and so the user is more forced to take a position. There are a number of psychological studies that discuss this issue. It's better to give more freedom of choice, a wider range of choice, or to be more polarized. The extreme situation is to give only two values: very easy, easy, or difficult. So you really have like sentiment analysis on social media. You just it is either positive or negative. You have more extreme values. You don't capture. You ask the user to take a strong position, but at the end could be give you more stronger indication instead of very neutral results. This is example of templates that you have to use. So remember to put clearly your questions and to have a way to collect the user ID, the task ID, the evaluator ID. Of course, all these things can be done using a Google form. If you do it remotely, you have say the user, do the task, and then please fill this form at the end. The issue that it should be clear, especially if you are more than one evaluator, it should be clear who is, okay, of course, if you do it remotely, the evaluator is your group. If you don't do it remotely, the evaluator should be identified to remember, because at the end, at some point you don't remember when and what happened, who was responsible for that. It's important to identify the user, the user for whom you have the results. So you may consider to create an online form in which you ask the user to profile himself very shortly, to put a nickname for privacy issue, because you probably are not able to guarantee the full privacy of the data. And also remember to have a clear, if you distinguish, if you have results, if you ask data to the user task by task, you must be sure that each question is related to a specific task. These are other examples of templates. Look, in this case, the user is identified by a number. And but that is a kind of meta form, so that in case you want to analyze more than one website. So these are other example of task answer forms. These are example of forms that probably do not of questions that probably do not apply to this specific case. But for example, if you had, because your specific case does not make any sense to ask about money in your voluntary association website. But for example, if your task is find out the price of the children museum, of a museum in the museum website, this question can be asked at the end of the evaluation, to see if the user really has remembered what he has seen. So it was evidence. There was evidence that he found this data and he really understood it. The same is asking the user to a specific time. This is another example of evaluators sheet that can be either, in principle, can be we created an online form that we use in some of our usability study, in which task time and end task, everything can be set automatically from the tablet application. Anyway, you need to keep track of when the task starts, when the task ends, the level of completeness, and observation. Of course, this data can be generated from this one. This is where you add your observations. This is another way of presenting the same thing. This is a question that was developed by a colleague of mine at University of Indiana. It's a design-oriented evaluation of perceived web or usability. Here, he basically organize. You can find this this questionnaire online if you want to use it. I don't want to post it as teaching material to avoid the feeling that you have to use it. Anyway, they organize the perceived usability of the user across different dimensions: content, information architecture, navigation. In this case, they use agree, disagree, statement agree, statement disagree methods, and they have used a 6 value scale, so that user can be more, with the first 3 is more polarized toward negative, with the 3 of them is more polarized towards positive, and there is not this in the middle value that you cannot classify as positive or as negative. So the D questionnaire is also related to perceived cognitive efforts, layout, and visual guidance. And this should be a link that was working till a few days ago, at least, to download the questionnaire. This is another example. This is the SUS, the System Usability Scale. That is another. Well, the System Usability Scale is a more general questionnaire for the usability of any system. That is a questionnaire customized for websites. And this again another example. Read. I'm not suggesting to take one or the other specifically. I'm suggesting to look at them to understand the kind of question. You can also make a selection of different questionnaires, define your own questionnaire. Okay, analysis and interpretation of the data. The question is: organize the data, translate quantitative data into quantitative data using some clustering technique, decide how to analyze the data, and discuss the results. I mean, that is a general problem of reporting some data. Use Excel to and make some visual representation. We don't ask you to do a advanced statistics because you don't have much data. With 5 users, you can report even data user by user, or based on different variables. It's up to you. Look at the data, and that is the reason why you have to plan very carefully which data you collect and how to analyze them, because it's really affect also the data that you have for your analysis and how to analyze it. Okay, you can, when you discuss the data, you can discuss the data by user, by task, by design dimension. And it's also important that to pinpoint which problems are more critical, and therefore recommend something for those main problems. So again, recommendation is optional, but if you decide to include also recommendation for redesign, look at the critical point, the critical problem of your application, identify the most critical problems, and then make recommendations for that main problems. Or organize problem by priorities and recommendation by priority of problems. Okay, very quickly, what are the benefits of testing? Is to have the real feedback from the users, to assess the look and feel of the application, so what the application look like to the user, and to understand real time the reaction, the behavior of the user. You can use it in as a complementary work with respect to inspection. So inspection give you some results. User testing can be used to validate inspection results, to discover something new. You typically discover something new from the user. So expert discover something that user might not discover. And also you can detect the false positive or false negative in the two methods. The drawback, what is the difficulties? Typically, these are typical mistakes that many students also do. Properly select the user sample. Again, you need to select 5 users, take users who have an homogeneous profile, where homogeneous does not mean that they are all male, all same age, all experience. You can mix up some of this profile, but I would recommend that at least the familiarity with technology is similar, so that you take people probably in the same age range, and people who, for example, are somehow interested to the topic of your website. Sometimes for the user, if you had something very complex, which is not your case, in your case, the user only have to understand how to navigate. But if you had more complex functionality, you need to give them some hints, preliminary hints, unavoidable hints on how to use the complex feature. The other aspect is the so-called Hawthorne effect. Users are not fully natural when they are observed. That is typical use. I'm not even natural now that you are observing me doing things, of course. So anyone who is observed, with a person in front of you observing you, or also remotely, they are not 100% natural. That is a bias, unavoidable. We know that also user feedback during user testing should be taken with some care. So the fact that you are not in a real life situation means that some conclusions are artificial in that they are not 100% true. And also that is probably one of the main drawbacks of user testing. There is a considerable burden in terms of time, user effort, and cost. Okay, the other thing is user testing versus multiple design. This is usability is valuable to make the design right. My suggestion and in a sense, the entire spirit of the next lesson will be, let's try to find out how to make the right design since the very beginning, so that at the end, having usability in mind since the very initial step, conceptualizing the design of our application, I will have a usable application which somehow that will be positively evaluated by inspector, by the user. So the issue is make the right design versus make the design right, because you do usability testing, you say, okay, I need to fix all this part, I need to make the design right. So contrary to our expectation, user testing by itself is not an effective vehicle for soliciting constructive suggestions about how to improve the design for end user. It's a means to identify problem, not to provide solution. That is the point. The point is that you will find mistakes. You will find through user testing that your website has many drawbacks. Maybe, I hope not, but if you have drawbacks, you may discover them. If you have weaknesses, you discover them. But the method that I've explained as user testing, which is the user testing method, does not tell you how to fix this problem. So it does not help you in design. Defining the right design is a further elaboration. And also another comparison between user testing and design. If you do user testing, the user don't give you new ideas. The user can give you ideas that are typically conservative. So that I want to conclude with this Hereford statement. If I had asked my customer what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Customers don't envision the future; they inform the present. So the corollary is asking the user who had never generated the idea of car. But before leaving you, I would like to. I will go back and I would like to. Okay, if there is any question, is there any question? 1 second, guys. I'm still. Oh, here this. Sometimes this window disappears. Okay, question on the chat. 1 second. Okay, I just need to move the chat. Okay. Let me see. There a question here. Sorry, guys. Okay. Oh, fine. When collecting data from different users, it's important to attribute results to different transactions the same user, evaluate single user, and then elaborate the task. But does it make sense to put all results together and elaborating them as a large pool of results? I'm not sure I've understood the question. The point is that you typically get data about each user and each task. And then it's a second step of your work is to analyze this data and see what they say. And there is no golden rule to say, okay, it's better to aggregate by user. Okay, first you have the data aggregated by user. What are the best way to compare the data across user? It depends on which data you collect and the kind of analysis you want to do. So maybe when you are collecting data, we can look at data together and I will give you some hints. But in principle, you can aggregate data across multiple dimensions. Can the user be neutral about something? Is that a bad idea to use a node number for the range of a value in scale? Well, the user, you're right. The assumption is, okay, if you take 5-point scale, for example, and the median is neutral, you are allowed the user to be neutral. If you take a 4-point scale, you are asking the user not to be neutral. In principle, user, yes, he can be allowed to be neutral, of course. It's if the question is if having seen the user, if you don't want to force the user not to be neutral, because people have opinion on things, have opinion, they have feeling. So that is what you capture. So the point is, do you want to? I think that the neutral answer does not provide less information than polarized answer. So forcing the user to be more polarized, give you more feedbacks. That is personal opinion, of course. It depends again on what you want to what you want to discover. Sorry, I'm still struggling with the bar. Can you explain more detail when measuring the success completion rate as a second mechanism 1 4? What do we have to do afterwards? The numbers in this slide. Sorry, go back here. Okay. This seems to just say you're evaluating. Okay, in the first case, you said success. You just take note about success for each user. Say you give for each task you give a label S, F, or P. Here, with the second method, you have a matrix in which you don't have a label failure, success, partial success, but you say 1 for indicating in this task the user had no problem. 2, he had minor problems. Of course, that's a sort of abstraction. You see that in general he had minor problem. 3rd is major problem. 4 is totally disaster. So there are just two metrics actually. Okay, I think that we're all with the questions. Let me just spend 1 second to explain what is the kind of report that I expect from you. So I go here, I stop sharing, and I'm going to share a different document. Oh, okay, this one. Okay. Please confirm that you can see it. So if you have, okay, or please tell me if you don't see it. It will be just very quick, very quick. Oh gosh, where is the chat disappear? Okay. Yes. Okay, sorry, sometimes the system is a bit slow because, I mean, there are 100 courses. Okay, just very quickly, not even putting it full screen. So the usability report 2 is optional. It's user testing on your website. Again, these are the steps with, as we have mentioned many times during this lecture. Conceive a use a homogeneous user profile. Design the task. So it's just a wrap up of what I said. Choose a homogeneous user profile. Define which measure you want to take. Okay. We said a minimum of 3 tasks. Probably to evaluate your entire website, you need more. When I say minimum, it means that, okay, don't run the task if you're not able to complete at least 3 tasks. For if you make 5 tasks, you get more data and you get a better report. Recruit a representative sample of user. Again, the user should be 5. However, if you want to have a flavor of your application with 3 users, it's okay. Do with 3 users. You will get a lower score, but it will still experience a very nice, you will still have a very educational experience. Execute the task or during or after, analyze and report the results. Now that is the structure of the usability report. The cover, a table with the link of your website. Okay. A table of content, an abstract. The abstract can be put before the table of content, is up to you. How do you design the study? All the detail of how, when, where was executed, the results, a short discussion, and any annex. So if you have the report of the questionnaires from your users, any data, I mean, so that is a concise. So I forgot to say that this should be maximum, I will write down, maximum 10 pages. And any annex, the annex are important because you can report the raw data. You can provide evidence that you did the work. Okay, any question? Or if you want, you can read the slides and postpone the question next week. Next week we will start with okay, we will start with with the conceptual design. I have set up. I'm going to post the schedule. I just forgot to post it and to show it to you. Let me see if we can share this one. I know that here you have to switch to another course. Okay, we can share this. Okay. So that is okay. The deadline for deliverable one, the first usability study on inspection, is set on 25th of May. So you have 2 weeks from now. While for producing the design document for your mockup, for your prototype, it has been set 1 month later, 22 of April. And then the deadline for the real prototype is the day after the end of the course. So this is the general schedule. We will discuss again next week. Next week will be devoted to conceptual design. We will have conceptual design for 3 lessons. Then we will get into more detail about the project specification, what you really have to produce in the design documentation, which can be understood only after you know the language of conceptual design. Then there will be some session of tutoring, and then more or less technology will start approximately the 8th of April. Well, by the way, there is a mistake here. It's my job, I forgot. Okay, so it's an open issue how we will be able to make the tutoring online. We're elaborating some methods. We hope that by the 8th of April, we will be able to meet in person in the classroom. And that is with this wish that I say you goodbye, and I see you next week. Bye-bye.